Okay. Whew. It's been a couple of weeks, so I think I'm finally emotionally ready to talk about this. We're going to the World Cup. It has been almost a decade since I or anyone else who loves US soccer has been able to say that, but by God, we did it. It wasn't always pretty, and it took every single point and goal we scored along the way to do it, but we're in. But ever since the final whistle blew in our last qualifying game in Costa Rica, which we lost, the debate about the qualifying process has raged on. Because in the aftermath of the US officially qualifying, two main camps have formed. One camp is full of people who look at some of our results in qualifying, like drawing El Salvador or getting smacked around by Canada, and think, you know what? We should be doing better than this. People in this category, which may or may not include me, lose sleep at night over how we played in some of those games. Like, how are we supposed to try and beat England if we still have questions about who our starting striker is, or our starting goalkeeper, or our starting coach? Sure, we got in the tournament, but not until the very last round of qualifying, and only because we didn't lose by enough in Costa Rica for them to jump us in the rankings. In the words of Jean-Ralphio Saperstein, we got in on a technicality. And for this first group of fans, that just doesn't really jive with what we were expecting. I mean, what they were expecting. Yeah, objectivity. But contrary to that, the second camp is the people who believe that qualifying was the most important thing. Doesn't matter how it happened, just that it happened at all, because we could not go another qualifying cycle without making it. Even if it came down to the last game, like it did last time. If the name of our country was on the list when it came time for the draw, we were in good shape. And in the end, these people came away satisfied, because although it wasn't pretty at times, and there were definitely moments where we could have played significantly better, we're in. And as the dust has settled over the past couple of weeks, my feelings have drifted more in this direction. Because while I would have loved to have seen us storm our way through the group like Canada did, there was a lot more at stake psychologically in us qualifying this time around than I realized initially. Here's what I mean by that. In 2018, the US were just one game away from making it to the World Cup. At the end of a rough qualifying round, which featured a 4-0 loss to Costa Rica and draws against Panama and Honduras, the team had taken just 12 points from their first 9 games. Not great, but they still had a chance to qualify if they could just beat Trinidad, or even draw them. And considering that Trinidad is a country about the size of Dallas and were dead last in the group coming into that match, getting a result seemed imminently possible. But we all know what happened next. The US team, led by Josie Altidore and Tim Howard, as well as a teenage Christian Pulisic, lost 2-1 in heartbreaking fashion. Pulisic's goal at the beginning of the second half wasn't enough to get them up off the mat, and as the final seconds ticked away, the squad's fate was confirmed. For the first time in over 30 years, the US men's national team wasn't going to the World Cup. Now, this result was important for a couple of reasons. First, it was super embarrassing and sparked an overhaul in the structure of the national team that honestly had been needed for a long time. Bruce Arena left the team, Sunil Gulati was out as the president of the federation, and our strategy on sending our young players abroad started to shift dramatically. But second, the failure in Trinidad, TM, marked a new low point in the modern history of US soccer. We hadn't really seen anything like this since the World Cup in 1998, where the team failed to take a single point out of the group stage. But for the past 4 years, impassioned words from commentators like Taylor Twellman have been played over and over and over again, and images from the failure in Trinidad, TM, have been burned into the players' brains. Even for the players who weren't on the team at that point, which at this point is the majority of them, they've come up through the ranks hearing and quite possibly internalizing the same message. You are not enough. And if you're trying to perform at the highest possible level, that's going to cause some problems. The task in front of this team at the beginning of qualifying was simple. Make it to the World Cup. I don't want to be overdramatic, but after what happened in 2018, the idea of it happening again was unthinkable. But if you're going into every game feeling the weight of an entire country's expectations on your likely very young shoulders, you aren't just playing the team across from you anymore. You're venturing into the territory of what's known as Beck's cognitive triad, which is a theory that helps us understand the relationship between our feelings about ourselves and our feelings about the future. The theory was developed by American psychiatrist Aaron Beck in 1967 and is usually used as a therapeutic framework for conditions like depression or anxiety. But in this case, we're going to apply it to sports performance, because to me, there is no better way to contextualize how important it was for this US team to qualify for the World Cup. Beck's theory revolves around the idea that depression and anxiety are rooted in negative automatic thoughts, are cognitive distortions that are outside of the control of the people experiencing them. Within that framework, you have ideas like arbitrary inference, where someone could establish a connection between two ideas where there really isn't one, or personalization, where a person blames themselves for things that aren't really within their control. There are several more of those ideas, but in the end, all of them come together to create this pattern of negative thoughts that encompasses Beck's triad, where a person forms a kind of negative thought cycle between their views on themselves, their views on how the world sees them, and ultimately, their views on the future. So let's think about this in practice. For any individual US player, and even the entire team as a whole, there's bound to be some residual self-blame for the failure in Trinidad. TM. 4 years is a long time to process something. The players who were there have had ample opportunity to analyze every touch and every missed chance that led to that failure. I'm not saying that this has happened, because I don't know these guys personally, obviously, but if you're Christian Pulisic or DeAndre Yedlin, you might have minimized your positive role in that game, or even in that entire qualifying cycle because of how it ended. You might have magnified a mistake that you made that night in your head, and had that impact the way you performed the next time a situation like that came up. And then you hear what Taylor Twellman said, and suddenly you've got evidence that other people think that way too. You're anxious about the future, and dreading the next time you have to step out onto the field. Negative thoughts continue to feed back into each other in a kind of vicious cycle, to the point that it becomes almost impossible to break out of it without significant help. This is how depression and anxiety continue to eat away at a person's cognition, and why it's so important to seek help if you're experiencing those symptoms. Like, I'm not kidding. Go get some help. Pause the video and go find someone to talk to. I'll wait. Okay, cool, we're back in. The point about the national team here is not that I think they're all depressed. Hopefully that's not what's happening, because that would suck. I do, however, think that they were pretty anxious about getting back to the World Cup, and were just as anxious about the consequences should they have failed to do so. That's why I think qualifying this round was so important, because in the case of Beck's cognitive triad, the way to get those negative thoughts to stop, and to be able to keep moving forward, is to break the cycle. Depressed patients break the cycle by seeking out therapy, or doing things they like, or even getting medication. But in the case of the men's national team, the only way they had to break the cycle was to qualify. For their confidence to really return, and for the negative thoughts and conversation to stop for a while, they had to do the thing that they'd been criticized so heavily for not doing 4 years ago. It had to happen. And it had to happen now, too, because there won't be another chance to get that monkey off their backs for a super long time. Along with Mexico and Canada, the US is hosting the World Cup in 2026, so they'll qualify for it automatically. This qualifying cycle in 2022 was their one shot to break the pattern of negative thinking and anxious energy that's surrounded this squad since that night in Trinidad, and to bring back the excitement and energy that we've all seen them show glimpses of during these games. Because this is the World Cup. This is our chance to show off all the young players that have been developing since the last time we were in one, and to maybe finally win over the soccer agnostics back home. We've got a real shot to do something special here, but not if we're stuck in the past. We already know we'll have one game against England, who might be the best team in the world, but we can't even hope to beat those guys without our players believing that they're the right ones to be out there doing the job. And after qualifying for Qatar 2022 outright, they finally just might. Was it an easy route through the group? No. Were there several points along the way that made us want to grab one of Berhalter's precious shoes and throw it at him? Yes, or maybe that was just me. But in any case, regardless of how we qualified for the World Cup, we got in. It's a different world now. We've seen a ton of turnover in US soccer, a global pandemic, and a new president come into office since 2018. But for our purposes today, the most important change was that the US made it back into the ranks of the best soccer-playing nations in the world. How we got there is secondary to breaking the cycle that could have kept us out of that group for much longer. The national tragedy that was 2018 can now officially be put behind us, and both the players and fans of the national team can look forward to what's to come instead of being held back by what's behind. The cycle of negativity has officially been broken, and hopefully, if all goes well, so can all our notions of what's possible for the US at a World Cup. Hello, and thank you all so much for watching the video. I'm Will, and while I'm still not crazy about the fact that the World Cup is in November, or that it's in Qatar, I still have to admit that I'm fully prepared to watch every single game when the tournament finally starts. I mean, it's the World Cup, right? If you want to hear more about why the tournament is at that time or in that place, feel free to watch the videos on sports washing that we put out, or to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because I'm sure that we'll be talking about that stuff again soon. If you're a supporter of the national team like I am, let me know how you think we're going to do in this tournament in the comment section. We may not go super far, but at least this time, there's a chance. Because we're in, baby. We're in. Until next time, I'm Will, and I hope you have an outstanding day.